So hi everybody. Look, I'm lucky enough to have Mark Horvat from the Acquiry. Mark, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Nice to be here.
Awesome. Look, we have come into a triple whammy with rising interest rates, with cost of living pressures, and with the recent budget changes announced here in Sydney, especially, or not in Sydney, in Australia nationwide. How do you feel that's been reflected in the property market? What are you seeing in terms of people going through opens and the general sentiment, I guess?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if I was to go back in time 6 months ago and say to a buyer I was working with, look, we can get rid of half of the people here. We can negotiate as opposed to keep bidding and bidding and hoping that we're going to get it. We can have choice. We can make decisions with a tiny bit more time to react to them. They all would have said, absolutely, let's go and do it. But now that we have that, obviously it took a big geopolitical event to springboard everything. But when you look at interest rates, cost of living, the political changes, literally everything that could have happened that would benefit a buyer 6 months ago has happened. But like a lot of things, we look for validation externally. We look to see, oh, what's my uncle doing? What's my cousin doing? What are they all doing? And the reality is they're sitting on their hands because in times of volatility, it's easier to just stay put and do nothing. Whereas I think from having been in the market for 25 years almost, these end up being the best opportunities. These moments where, when you go to an open house and it's definitely not as busy, when you see fewer investors there and it's a lot more end users, people that are going to actually buy it because they want to live in it. These are all, I think, depending on your lens and depending on your spin, I think these are all positive things, but buyers need reassurance and confidence that sometimes you don't have to wait till 30 people are queuing outside of a property to feel like you need to get into the market. These are the moments when it's actually a better time to go and do something.
Yeah, and I find that those are real-time metrics. The number of people that you see in inspections and the number of bidders at auction. They're not leading metrics, they're not lagging metrics. They're like real time. They're on the money. They're at the time metrics, and they're the sort of metrics that you can really only see in terms of boots on the ground. I think the measures that we're seeing at the moment as well around auction clearance rate, the lowest auction clearance rate that we've had in Sydney since before COVID. It's really interesting time. And you mentioned a little bit about now is a great opportunity to see, given that there's a particularly bit of volatility, to see if you can pick up a bargain.
It's a great opportunity to pick up a bargain, but it's also very easy to overpay. I think the volatility out there right now is something that most people aren't recognizing. We like to look at, oh, house prices moved up 0.6% this month. Yet in reality, I'm looking at places that are selling at prices they really shouldn't be selling at today. And I'm seeing some people pick up some fantastic deals. But I actually think there's more people probably who haven't felt empowered enough to take what's been going on around out there to the market, to the agents, to the sellers, and use that leverage. Buyers never really had a stick. Now they have one. You have to use it. And I think that volatility is probably more of a risk than I think people are talking about. I think a lot of buyers are going to go out there this Saturday and pay far more than they probably should. And it's the job of people like you and me to make sure that doesn't happen when they're working with us.
Yeah. And why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that people could potentially overpay for property? Is it because they're comparing the wrong property? Is it because they don't know how much to pay? Is it because that they're taking whatever information the sales agent is feeding them? Why particularly do you think
that information the sales agent is feeding them, I think, is a really important one? I say this a lot of times, and I've got lots of people I know who are sales agents, and I don't mind some of them, but they're not your friends when you're a buyer. They work for the seller to get them the best price they possibly can. So everything they're telling you has to be taken with that consideration in mind. They are telling me this because they were hired to get the best price they possibly could from the seller. And I think when you approach it with that caveat, you take everything and look at it more critically. So I do think that volatility is real. I think a lot of people are still going to be led by what the agent's telling them they need to do to get it done. I was at an event with 400 plus agents on Wednesday, and I can tell you they are a lot more desperate than they will seem on Saturday at the open houses. They'll be more charming, but underlying that, there's a desperation, there's a concern, and they will work on a deal. But you have to be confident enough to go out with that. I think anchoring too much to prices that might have been high 4 months ago. When you set a building record 4 months ago, that comparable really isn't very relevant today. And
Mm.
I think it's about being clear in terms of what you're looking at, how you're approaching your analysis, how you're determining value. But in a nutshell, I think that's why people will end up paying too much, because they're using the wrong information and they're not operating in the present environment, where I think there's a lot more maneuverability with sellers than actually people realize.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it a few times, but we're moving from an environment that was predominantly FOMO, like maybe fear of missing out, to an environment of FOGO, which is fear of getting out.
Yeah.
And some, especially with the budget changes, some property owners will want to get out over this next 12 months as a means of having their capital gains tax being grandfathered through whatever system is happening, or they're not sure of the budgetary changes and how it's going to impact them. And ultimately, I feel that we're going to see a lot more supply coming to the market, particularly here in Sydney.
Yeah, I think you always have these overreactions that take place. You get a piece of information and you move way in the other direction. I think buyers are doing that right now. Everything they could have wanted has come, and now they're like, oh, maybe I'll just wait and see how this shakes out. I think sellers are right now, today, coming to terms with it. Some people will be a bit more clinical about it and just accept it and move on and say, hey, great, I bought this for $60,000 in a bag of oranges. I've made $1 million. That's good enough. Other people, maybe they bought more recently, they didn't buy as well, they didn't buy the right property, may feel like they're now seeing that equity that they thought they have get squeezed. And it takes a little while to come to terms with that. But I do agree with you. I think there's going to be an increase in supply of people that have just decided, I want to get out of this. And for buyers, that's a great opportunity. We need that supply, I think, to bring the market to where it needs to be. Previously, when we've seen prices stall a bit in Sydney, particularly, that kind of slowdown has been literally stopped by a drop in the number of properties hitting the market. And then you get supply and demand back in equilibrium, and then things take off. I think this time, though, we're going to see more stock hit the market. It's going to take longer for it to sell. It's going to stick around a bit longer. It's going to come back with another agent. And I think all of these developments are really good for buyers. You just got to know how to play your cards.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting 12, 18, 24 months, I think, in particular. What about if I am a buyer and I go to one of these open homes? How would you suggest that I assess whether the price and the information is legit?
It's a good question. I think right now you're seeing a lot of different approaches that agents are taking. There's a big kind of articles and everything through the Sydney Morning Herald about underquoting. I think that would be the default approach. I think a lot of agents would love to just, advertise it at a really crazy price, bring tons of people in and see where it goes to. I think there's a lot of pressure against them from doing that right now. So I think the one trick kind of approach won't necessarily work. How would I look at it? I think the best way of looking at it is being really clear about what's happening in your marketplace. You need to see lots of things. And I think it's in that relativity that you start to get clarity. The biggest mistake I tell buyers all the time is you've got to get off your phone and go out and see things in real life and get a flavor for what they're guiding, what they sell for, and that becomes your kind of bank of where you make your own decisions from there. You can't do that based on looking at 6 or 7 photos that in no way look like the actual property and making these analytical decisions that way. So what would I do? I would be good at tracking stuff. Every time I go and see something, obviously I've got the guide, I've got the date, but seeing how that evolves over time as we see the days on the market stick out a bit more, seeing what things actually sell for. The fact is, we can often see what something sells for that might not be shared with the public. I hate to say it, a lot of agents, I just call them up and say, hey, what'd you get for that one? And they'll share it. But knowing what things actually achieved, where it started, what it guided previously, all of that information, I think really helps buyers make better decisions and get more confident with what they're doing. So be a bit more detail oriented when you're looking at this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Once you see a certain volume of property, you start to get a little bit more confidence in your assessment as well. But you need to be going out to properties and you need to be having a look at what's selling. I often work backwards with clients as well. I say, look, this is what they're asking, but this is what's sold and this is the price of things sold. And this is the size, the configuration, the quality. So you need to go out there for yourself and see that content to give you the confidence that you are paying the right price as well. I've got an example. I was at an inspection locally over the weekend. They were guiding 1.7 and they provided their own comps. And I said, firstly, this isn't
Yeah.
going to sell for the guide. And secondly, these aren't comps.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You'd be amazed though how many buyers use that as their Bible almost. And it's just, wow. Again, the sort of obvious stuff that really we know is the case, but we try and help our clients realize they're not your friends. The comparables are there to help the seller get the most money possible,
Yeah.
not to necessarily reflect the market. They're there to help justify why you should give them more money than maybe it's actually worth.
Maybe if we step back a little bit more, which demographic do you see are predominant in the market at the moment? Are you seeing downsizers, families? Are you seeing first-time buyers?
Look, I saw a lot of first-time buyers. I think the incentives that were out there prior to the budget, prior to the interest rate hikes, excited a lot of people. So I think they are out there, but they're also the most lacking in confidence, I think. So they're the ones that are most nervous, less likely to be excited when they see 3 people in an open house.
Yeah.
They're more likely to be a little bit nervous. And I think for all the first-time buyers out there who are basing the next 5 years of either renting that place or owning it, I'm hoping more and more of them choose that ownership path and decide to go and get a great place. So first-time buyers, a lot. Look, this is the perfect market for anybody who's trading up. I call it the trading gap. It hasn't been relevant as much in Australia as it has been everywhere else in the world over the last 2 decades. The trading gap, and when there's an adjustment in prices downwards, it's the best thing for people who are looking to upsize. To give you a quick example, if you're in $1 million place and you're looking to upgrade to a $2 million place, you can think that 10% drop is really harsh. Boy, my $1 million place is now worth 900 grand. I've lost $100,000, but the $2 million place is now 1.8. So the gap used to be $1 million. Now it's 900.
Yeah.
And that gap and being able to get into something slightly better than you might have otherwise because the market has moved back a little bit, that's the best opportunity to move upwards.
Yeah.
So I hope a lot of people start to see that, the first time buyers get out there. And yeah, those are, I think, the 2 areas that should be most active right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think, we're at a bit of an inflection point at the moment where we're seeing prices start to come down. So we might find that people that have made gains are starting to sell now. And then people, they might be downsizing. So as a downsizing, look, you've made your money. You want to cash in and buy something that is a little bit lower value and retain the profits. But at the same time, if we give it a little bit more time, prices would have come down, and those people, it all changed from a seller's market to a buyer's market, I truly believe. And those people, as you mentioned in that example, they can look to upsize, or they can look to get out of that rental property and buy their first home as well.
Yeah, I think, look, if I was cashing out of the market today, if I didn't have to, I probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
I probably would sit tight for a bit. But if I was looking to upgrade, if I was looking to enter into the market, if I was looking to buy something for a really long-term blue chip investment hold, I think there's going to be tons of great opportunities. But like I said, sprinkled in those opportunities, there's going to be a lot of duds and bad decisions and people 5 years from now that may not have made $1 on the decision they make today.
Yeah. Where do you see the majority of opportunities arising? Is it in the east? Is it in the northern suburbs? Is it in the west?
Oh, good question. Look, I think Sydney's unique, right? It's unique geographically. You can't build or get around as easily the closer you are to the ocean. Building in and of itself is a minefield. It takes forever to get something done. It's extremely expensive, and that leads on to how long it takes, how much you can build. So I think looking at some of the best parts of Sydney that people want to be in, I'm not one of those guys that really was going to say, oh, the inner west over the eastern suburbs or the eastern suburbs over the lower north shore. To me, Sydney's an area that when you are comfortable and settled and your family's there and your kids go to school there, Sydney's got so many amazing areas. I think within each of those areas, there are some decent opportunities. There's some suburbs that probably are more likely to see some improvement based on the demographic and type of buyers who are going to be active out there over the next stretch of time. I like a lot of places where there's great first-time buyer properties, where there's good varied stock, where you get people moving from apartments into smaller houses. Some of the areas that people really do want to live in, I'm quite excited about. But in terms of Sydney itself, I love the kind of, I guess, like most people, the air is close to the water, close to the city. I think, funnily enough, I think in a market that's rising, people have to move further away from that. But now they might actually be able to get a little bit closer to that. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah.
So I would be encouraging a lot of people to be upping their expectations, to be trying for something a bit better than they thought they might be able to get, a bit closer, a bit nicer. So I think there's opportunities in that, both specifically to suburbs and pockets, but also just generally.
Yeah.
You could live closer and in a better spot than you might have been able to 6 months ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's probably important to understand what's important to you as well. If for owner occupier, do you want to be around family and schools, etc.? Lifestyle is a big important part of it, but not everybody would be looking to get it in as an investment. So it's really about what's important to you as a buyer as well. How do you help people articulate what's important to them and how you meet that criteria?
Good question.
Yeah.
I find that the experience that a lot of people have with buyer's agents in Australia, it's like going to a restaurant and ordering off a menu. Okay, how many bedrooms would you like? How many bathrooms would you like? When I started doing this 25 years ago, we learned that the most important thing to focus on are the requirements, how they want to live. You challenge them on that. You ask them, 3 bedrooms. Well, see, there's only 2 of you. What's the game plan? When's that likely to be? What are you going to do with it in the meantime? Understanding what they're trying to do now and over the next stretch of time, because I think most buyers are really only looking at the immediate problem to solve and not thinking about what happens, because they're probably going to be there longer than they think. I think that's one thing with owner occupiers particularly. They often live in these places longer than, I'll just be there for 2 or 3 years. 10 years later, 3 kids in one room, they're like, oh God, probably should do something now. So I think it's just asking lots of questions and taking an interest in people and knowing how to solve that through making better real estate decisions.
Yeah, I think it's important people need to consider their lifestyle as well. So that they think, oh, I'd love a 2-bedroom apartment looking over the ocean. Okay, how are you going to get to work? How are you going to get your kids to school? Where's the local shops? Where are your amenities? What are you going to do on the weekend? Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that. And it's when you ask them those pertinent questions at the beginning from the engagement set, that's when you really articulate, that's the goal. How do we work our way backwards? And
I've got a good point on that. When I started off working in London, we used to have these kind of almost like funnels for buyers where everyone wanted to live in Notting Hill, let's call it. But you've got Notting Hill and most people can't afford it. Just after Notting Hill, there's Ladbroke Grove. And then just after Ladbroke Grove, there's Queen's Park and Kensal Rise and all the way up to Willesden and Hosley. You've got all these different areas that come with trade-offs. And there was just this natural funnel that you would take people through. Sometimes it followed the tube map. Sometimes it followed whatever. What I find interesting here is that in the UK, agents as well as the property search portals are very good. They use radius from a spot, whereas in Australia, you can't search as easily that way on a lot of things. So you got to plug in your suburb, and if there's something 2 suburbs over that might be where a lot of people from that suburb are going, you've got to figure that out yourself. There's nothing that's channeling you into some of these different spots. And I think that lifestyle equation, the trade-offs, when someone works with me, right from the beginning, we explore those things right from the beginning. And after we've tangibly seen it, we start to get clear on what's the right trade-off. Am I happy to take a little less space, but be closer to here because this is how I live? Or am I like, you know what? Actually, I love the peace. I love the quiet. I don't care about the extra 15 minutes. And then we're able to save time and really drill down in that spot.
Yeah. And sometimes we see that from an investment perspective as well. Okay, this suburb is hard to get into, but next suburb over is a little bit more reasonable. And then we find that a lot of people will get priced out of the first market. So they'll move beyond that into the surrounding suburbs.
Absolutely.
And that's probably an important thing to note from an investment perspective as well. Sometimes you can find a good deal in the next suburb over or the next street over, but at the same time there's also other things to consider as well, like why aren't people moving into that suburb next door as well?
Oh, look, I think there's 2 things. I think if we want to think that the market and people are gonna, there's a reason. Sometimes there just isn't. The market just hasn't priced it in correctly. And I think you doing this and me doing this for a long time, there are certain pockets, certain places, certain suburbs that are just fundamentally undervalued. And I don't always rely on people to determine that. The market always catches up. I can think of countless areas through my career where you would look at it and you'd say, that's just too cheap. And every single time within 6 months, 18 months, 3 years, it always catches up because the fundamentals are the fundamentals. And I think understanding what those might look like, sometimes if it seems, oh boy, it does seem like really good value, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just hasn't been priced into the market yet, and not enough people have gone in, but they will. They always do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of examples like that in Sydney, but they're very old examples. But Bondi, for example, nobody wanted to live in Bondi post World War II because, or during and post World War II, because it was thought that if we were ever attacked again, they would attack at the heads.
Yeah.
And so that was some of the cheapest property that you could buy in Sydney. But 50, 60 years later, maybe even longer later, that's some of the most expensive now. Western Sydney at a time was a lot of farmland.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's gone up so much in value. You can't get in Western Sydney for love or money.
We just bought our family house in Darlinghurst, and not being a native Sydney sider, lived here for quite a few years, but I knew it passed. I didn't realize it was like the epicenter of crime and prostitution for about 100 years.
Yeah.
But where I absolutely love where I am. It's safe, it's peaceful, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so close to the city, and I'm just like, man, that doesn't quite make sense. And like you said, sometimes it just takes a while for things to catch up. And with the right people seeing that opportunity, that value, I'm sure a lot of people thought, man, Bondi's way too nice for it to be this dirt cheap. And they piled in. I actually know some people that did that probably 40 years ago. And
Yeah.
they're doing all right now.
Yeah, areas gentrify, and you see a new demographic of people move in, or people age out and new people move in.
Amenities come in as well too. Like, I think infrastructure comes, but also cafes and shops. It's amazing what creativity brings to these places. It's so expensive to operate in some spots that when you're doing it on a bootstrap, you got to go to other places. And that brings new people, new residents, new businesses. And it just takes a little while. I think I love going to Newtown and Erskineville and Enmore and all these places. Like, they're so much fun and so cool. And that's because of all the creativity, all the great businesses pumping in there, make it such an amazing place to live in.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, doesn't do a bad job for property prices as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I even remember like around Sydney Olympic Park and Newington, that was all landfill.
Yeah.
That was like a literal rubbish dump.
Yeah.
And now you got people living in Newington, Wentworth Point. They've just announced as well, I think 25,000 homes in a Sydney Olympic Park expansion with thousands of jobs. And it's actually going to become, or it has been, a more desirable place to live. Like, people don't remember the landfill.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, very good. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how is the best way to do it?
Ah, great. Honestly, hit the Acquiry. I love having consultations with people. I think the best way of figuring out if it's the right fit, if there's something that we can do to help, is to just jump on for a chat. I think to work with an advisor, we've spoken about this, Gianni, you've got to have a part of you that thinks, actually, would I be getting a better outcome by working with someone really great? And I think you'll have a clear answer to that after a 20, 30-minute conversation. Go to theacquiry.com.au, organize a consultation, and let's have a chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Gianni.